This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Should Joe Biden accept Donald Trump's invitation to play 18 holes of golf, spotted 20 strokes, to win $1 million for the charity of his choice? Friends, on this episode of Real Talk, we will ask that pressing question, plus talk about a few more serious or significant things with Max Fawcett, lead columnist for Canada's National Observer. It may be the dog days of summer for some, but not us here on Real Talk. We will be solving problems today, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you bring to the table in the live chat. All of that coming up right after we remind you that these episodes of Real Talk happen with the support, the presenting sponsorship of Alberta's top online real estate school. That's Relo at relo.ca, where better real estate training starts. Folks that are looking to get into a career in real estate, and there's more and more of you as you sense those opportunities around you. Populations are booming. Housing markets are hot. People are looking to buy or sell that perfect place. You're going to want to get started online at Relo. They've got instructors ready around the clock to help you prepare to write your exam, to get certified, and then to kick off your career on the right foot. You get the best of both worlds, a fundamentals course and a practical course, and you can save money with a promo code exclusive to Real Talk audience members. Ryan100, that's all one word, Ryan100 knocks $100 off the Alberta Commercial Real Estate Bundle, the Alberta Residential Real Estate Bundle, when you get started today at relo.ca. What do you think, John? Should Joe Biden take on Donald Trump in a 18 holes of golf to determine who, in fact, is the better player?
That's going to be that's going to be a longer than usual game with those two guys.
Yeah, talk about slow play in golf. Yeah. All right, before we welcome in Max Fawcett, who's lead columnist with Canada's National Observer, I'm looking forward to this episode. We're going to talk about 50 different things. Let's get to it. If you didn't hear it, this is what Donald Trump, Republican nominee for president, had to say from the podium the other day.
I'm also officially challenging Cricket Joe to an 18-hole golf match right here on Doral Blue Monster, considered one of the greatest tournament golf courses anywhere in the world, one of the great courses of the world. It will be among the most watched sporting events in history, maybe bigger than the Ryder Cup or even the Masters. And I will even give Joe Biden 10 strokes aside. 10 strokes, that's a lot. That means 20 strokes in case you don't play golf. I will give him 10 strokes aside, and if he wins, I will give the charity of his choice, any charity that he wants, $1 million. And I'll bet you he doesn't take the offer. I would bet he, because he's all talk.
Okay. I got to be honest. There's a lot of things I've been critical of Donald Trump on, but I love this stuff. The showmanship, the throwing down the gauntlet. The only problem, John, is that these two are in a race to become the president of the United States.
I don't know if you can call it a race with these slowpokes. You might want to call it, a stroll.
Alberta Ganger in our live chat on YouTube says, I can't wait. I want to see that 8 handicap. You remember in the debate, Joe Biden having a tough time remembering what he got his handicap down to. Anyway, none of this is really important. Let's get to Max Fawcett, lead columnist for Canada's National Observer. If you were Joe Biden or advising the president of the United States, would you take Trump up on his bet? Spotted 20 strokes. I mean, that's even a tough look off the top. If you're an 8 handicap, you're not taking 20 strokes from Trump, right?
Yeah, I mean, he invited this by suggesting that he was, as good of a golfer as Trump is, or that he could keep up. He didn't have to take that bait. He took it, and now I think here we are with everyone, you and I, people like us who despise Trump and everything he stands for, but you have to tip your hat because he's got him checkmated here. You know that Trump would whip his ass at golf because that's all he spends his time doing. It's all he did when he was president. And Biden kind of painted himself into this corner. So it's just yet another manifestation of the kind of weakness and frailty, I think, that has a lot of Democrats. It has George Clooney panicking right now about Biden's chances in November.
Yeah, I was reading there was a piece in the New York Times this week talking about how Kamala Harris is having to sort of walk a fine line right now. You know, she's got to be ready for anything, which could include nominee for president, but she can't come across like she's getting ready for it. She's got to come across like she's loyal as hell, standing by Joe's side through everything. It's a tightrope act right now.
Yeah, it's tricky for everyone. Most of all her. I mean, I don't think she's gotten a fair shake in a lot of this stuff. So it would be very interesting it would be very fitting, I think, for her to have her moment in 2024 with Trump now being a convicted felon and her being a former former prosecutor, excuse me, and being able to really make the case against Trump and what he would do in his second term, because it's abundantly clear after the last few weeks that Joe Biden can't make that case. And it sucks and it's sad, but Democrats kind of have to play the hand they have and not the hand they had 4 years ago.
Yeah.
If I was, for what it's worth, if I was Gavin Newsom or someone like that, I would take Trump up on his offer. Like you need someone to kind of put him back in his place a little bit on this stuff. And I would love to see Trump on a golf course with cameras because you know that he cheats in ways that, most of us weekend golfers probably wouldn't even dare to do. So I think that would be kind of funny, but none of this stuff should be funny. This is, like you said, this is the race for the most important job in the world. And we have two varyingly decrepit seniors competing for it.
Yeah, somebody said this is, in our chat says this is not a pissing contest. This is a dribbling contest or a drooling contest. Maybe Kathy wonders, can we remove both candidates and try again? Kathy says maybe the U.S. should be single for a while and find itself again. Right, Kathy? Or maybe have they tried unplugging it and plugging itself back in? I don't know. Are you saying that Gavin Newsom, you saying the governor of California should play Trump himself? Or are you saying you should advise Biden to play Trump? You're saying that Newsom should swing the sticks.
Oh, yeah. Newsom should play the sticks. I don't think Biden could complete 18 holes.
And the thing is, they're already experiencing, and I already know people are going to. We haven't even been talking for 3 minutes. We're going to get ourselves in trouble. But it's not ageism. We're getting some criticism around our commentary on Joe Biden that Real Talk has been ageist in its assessment of this. It's not ageism. It's being realistic. It's calling a spade a spade. It is what it is, and it's making a mockery, quite frankly, right now, I think, of this presidential race, and it actually should be, on a serious note, quite concerning for absolutely everybody, including Canadians. But the Democrats are getting down to crunch time. Like all this talk right now, Joe Biden on the record into a microphone last week says somebody is asking about his plan and whether or not he would consider stepping down, whether or not he would consider withdrawing his candidacy. He says, maybe if the Lord Almighty himself came down and told me to, I might consider it. It gives you a sense of where Biden's head is at. But it's July, man. It soon will be August, and then September, then October, and then we're weeks away from the election. So something's got to happen soon or nothing's going to happen. And if nothing happens, I think we all see the writing on the wall. It's that obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We do. Calling a spade is not ageist. I think a lot of us have had people in our lives and it's sad and it's a tragedy, but as they get older, they start to become diminished, whether it's because of a condition or just the passage of time. And, we're talking about the most important job in the world, the guy with his finger on the nuclear button, so to speak. With that debate, a lot of, millions of Americans saw what they saw, and it's not helpful for Biden's allies to sort of gaslight them and pretend, no, you're just being disloyal. You have to shut up and, back him because Trump is worse. Obviously, Trump is worse. No one disputes that, I don't think, on the Democrat side. But the point is to win the election. The point is not to become president. The point is to win the election. And I have no doubt that Biden would be a competent president. I have huge doubts that he can win the election. And so, they have a few weeks here, I think, to make the move that they need to make. There are some options. They could theoretically use the 25th Amendment that they talked about with Trump when he was in office. There's some sort of, I think, internal party maneuvers they can make at the convention. But they got to make a move soon because, like you say, the calendar is getting pretty short here. I do think if they found a way to convince him to step aside, and then had a really quick sort of, series of debates and then a vote at the convention, it would be the most exciting thing anyone has ever seen in politics, in American politics. I think the Democrats would get huge energy. They would get a huge lift. And then all of a sudden, the spotlight would be on the only senior citizen left in the race, Donald Trump. And all of a sudden, his frailties and his weaknesses and his pretty obvious mental deficiencies would suddenly become the subject and in the spotlight. They just have to find their courage here, the Democrats.
Plain Power 2 in our YouTube live chat says, I'd much rather see Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau have a cage match. Winner takes all. We did see Senator Patrick Brazeau and the Prime Minister, before he was the Prime Minister, square off in a boxing match. But it's kind of been an interesting dynamic. We're talking, depending on when people will listen to this podcast, but you and I are talking as the Calgary Stampede is underway. And the Conservative leader of the official opposition, has been critical of Justin Trudeau for not being there in Calgary. Of course, Trudeau attending NATO meetings, and you may suggest that that's probably more important, or where he should be. But it just goes to show that since Poilievre has become leader of that party, he has been in campaign mode since day one, and he's not taking his foot off the gas despite the fact it's the summer.
Yeah, I mean, it's he really is relentless, and you feel the Liberals kind of backing away from the fight a little bit. I've heard that explanation for why Trudeau didn't make an appearance here. I've also heard the explanation that he alternates between the Pride Parade in Vancouver and the Stampede every 1 year that, 1 year the other one. I don't buy any of it. He's the Prime Minister. He can get on a plane whenever he wants and get to wherever he wants. And if he wanted to spend even one afternoon in Calgary at the Stampede, he could have done it. There was definitely room in his schedule, including NATO. The truth is, he doesn't want to be here. The only MP in Calgary is a guy, George Shahal, wonderful guy, but he put his name to the letter in caucus, basically saying that it was time to have a conversation about leadership. So it kind of feels like he's running from the conversation that many people in his party want to have about his leadership. I got in trouble for saying this on Twitter from progressives.
You got in trouble from progressives on Twitter, Max?
I know.
Oh my God. Are you okay? Are you okay?
No.
Did the sun still come up? Does your family still love you?
Yeah, no, we survived somehow. They got mad at me because I said there were similarities between Biden and Trudeau right now.
100%.
Are in similar situations, and it would behoove both of them to kind of address the situation sooner rather than later. Now we're seeing in the Globe and Mail, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland sort of being positioned under the bus in terms of anonymous comments out of the PMO saying that she's not doing a good job of communicating the budget, and so it feels like they're preparing to make a change there, but. As with the Democrats, I kind of think that unless they make a change at the top of the ticket, things aren't going to improve. People are not in my sort of, and again, I'm in Calgary, so this is very different from being in Toronto or Montreal, but it seems to me that as long as his name is affiliated with the party, a lot of people just aren't even going to consider the possibility of voting for him.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you, and I think the comparison's fair. I mean, there's obviously huge differences in the storylines, but the number one point, the main point, is that there are millions of people, or in the U.S., tens of millions of people, or even hundreds of millions, that won't consider that party on the ticket as long as they see that name, they're heading it up. So there it is. So you really do think that you do think that Trudeau should have shown up to the Calgary Stampede? I mean, there was heavy representation of his cabinet there. I was running into them at Stampede parties here, there, and everywhere. But yeah, no signs of the PM. You really actually think that it matters that he's there?
I do. I think it would be the right story for him to be telling, that he's not afraid, that he's taking on the fight. I remember very famously, I don't remember because I wasn't alive, but being a student of political history, his father in 1968 showed up at the Saint Jean Baptiste Day celebrations in Montreal, and the separatists were known to be in the audience, and they started throwing rocks and other things at the box that had all the politicians. All the other politicians went inside, ran away from the protest. Pierre Trudeau went out to the rail and basically said, "Give me what you got. I'm not afraid of you." And I think Justin should have done the same thing with the Calgary Stampede. Show up, get in people's faces, be charming, and remind them that he's not going to back down just because Pierre Poilievre has a bunch of cool slogans.
Yeah, slogans. I mean, he's back at it. I don't know. I think you probably did see the Rick Bell column in the Calgary Herald the other day. Did you see this? Dinger's got an interview with Pierre Poilievre, and Poilievre in his hometown of Calgary, of course, where he grew up, and he's talking to Rick Bell, and Bell paints a picture of this coffee shop conversation they have. Let me just read this. I mean, this part's ridiculous, but Poilievre is here for the Calgary Stampede, here in the city where he grew up, stopping at a pleasant coffee shop a few blocks from a drug consumption site where outside the facility, addicts stagger through neighborhood streets. This is the scene set. Anyway, here's what Poilievre tells him. Pierre Poilievre tells Rick Bell, quote, "I'm the normal guy. Trudeau and the NDP are the wackos." There's that word again. That's not an accident. There's that word again. Trudeau and the NDP are the wackos. They are the extremists. I'm the normal, centrist, mainstream leader, the only one running. The other guys are absolute raving wackos. They are ideological lunatics. We've seen this in politics. We've seen it in campaign strategy, and it works. Taking one word and hammering it and hammering it and hammering it. Is wacko the hashtag for the next federal election in Canada?
I suppose it could be. If I was his team, I would be a little careful here because he's the one who's starting to sound like a wacko to me. The language here is just so out of proportion to what we should expect from people in public life. And, Pierre Poilievre is the guy who has the history of associating with the wackos. You look at the convoy types, you look at the crypto evangelists. Like, he tends to surround himself with some pretty wacko people. If the Liberal Party had any fight left in it, they would have already put a video together, an ad about all the associations that he has had with genuinely wacko people. So I think they need to be careful here. I think they're getting a little far over their own skis, maybe, getting a little too high on the smell of their own farts. But, with a 20-point lead in the polls, feels like they can't do anything wrong right now.
Yeah, no kidding. We had I want to give credit here in the chat to who it was Randy. Randy says, well, come on, Max. He says, Trudeau steps down. Who's going to replace Trudeau? He goes, Mark Carney, give me a break. I know that some people thought that Anita Anand might take a run at it. I've heard a lot of people, Liberal staffers in particular, talking about Francois Philippe Champagne and the momentum that he has, the respect that he has within the party. I don't feel like there's this... You look at leadership races, and Poilievre was like the no-brainer. You look at the Alberta NDP leadership race, Nenshi, the no-brainer. I mean, 80% plus. I mean, that's a landslide. But with that federal Liberal Party, you don't get the sense that there's like one heir apparent. Do you?
No, and I think that's by design. I think Trudeau has been very careful, to the party's detriment, perhaps not to his own, of keeping it from becoming a Paul Martin situation. The way it was with him and Jean Chrétien, where it became obvious that there was an heir apparent, there was a natural successor, and that eventually undermined Chrétien's leadership. So he's been very careful not to let anyone's star rise too high. And if their star does rise, he tends to put them in places where they are going to take a lot of the heat. You look at Chrystia Freeland, and it wasn't that long ago that a lot of people, including me, thought that she was sort of ticketed for big things. She was going to be the next prime minister. She had all this, she defeated Trump with the NAFTA negotiations, and now the way people talk about Freeland, you see this piece in the Globe, it really has shifted. So there isn't a natural successor. I've heard Christy Clark's name pop up recently, which is bananas to me, the former BC premier, because I'm not even sure she is a federal Liberal anymore. A guy like Dominic LeBlanc would be, to me, a good choice. Very good politician. Very sort of charismatic, speaks French, has a continuity with the current regime. Carney does poll the best if you look at the recent data in terms of, opening up people who are currently closed off to voting Liberal. But I do think that it requires him to actually get into politics, and we haven't seen him do that yet, right? It's one thing to be asked if you want to run. It's one thing to imagine it. It's another to actually do it. And I'm just not sure he wants to put his head into the blender right now, given what he would have to endure. In your opinion, does a federal party leader, and you may answer this however you like, you may need to offer caveats, you may need to take this on a case-by-case basis, but does the leader of a party need to bring name recognition, charisma, pizzazz,
fundraising ability, membership sales ability, that sort of a thing? Or does the leader of a party need to be like astute and insightful on policy and have a big vision and like understand where they want the economy to go and industry and have the, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, are you looking for like the face of the party, or are you looking for like the motor that's going to drive the bus? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the platonic ideal is Pierre Trudeau, because he was both. He was a rock star, and he was, this deeply intelligent, deeply thoughtful policy mind. Those people, I think, come along once in a lifetime. And the field right now for the Liberals seems pretty bifurcated between those two sides. So you have really smart, really competent people, like Chrystia Freeland, like Anita Anand, like Mark Carney, like Mark Miller. There are lots of smart policy minds in the Liberal Party right now. I'm not sure that is what wins. In fact, I am certain that is not what wins elections in 2024. You need to be a very good communicator. You need to be able to tell a good story. Danielle Smith, in a lot of ways, is sort of the politician of the moment. That's the model. Is you want someone who is able to communicate on issues as effectively as she is. And I am not sure that the Liberals have anyone quite that talented in their midst. Maybe it's Sean Fraser, the housing minister, who's been pretty darn good at that file and at kind of taking the fight to the Conservatives. Maybe there's someone from outside that could come back. I'm not sure, but the bench feels pretty thin when you realize that they have to be this sort of modern, gifted communicator in the way that Danielle Smith is, the way Pierre Poilievre is, and Liberals haven't really been cultivating that, because all that juice and all that energy goes to the Prime Minister, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I'm curious to see, like, you have, that and that same sort of a pushback, right? When Trudeau's here in February, we talked to him and said, are you going to be there next election? He says, absolutely intend to be there. You look at the polling, nothing's really changed with the polling. Now you're going to look at this and say, well, this is not an emergency yet, but you also got to be fair to whoever. Number one, a leadership race has to accomplish what it should accomplish, right? Like we talked about, fundraising, membership sales, etc. And then you got to give the new leader runway as well. I mean, this is my, I don't know if I say my concern. I don't have a vested interest, maybe just concern for the health and safety of planet Earth with the outcome of the American election. But that's the concern as well, is like, this can't be an 11th hour sort of a thing. I think it sends the wrong message to American voters. I think it sends the wrong message to everybody. It's like sort of a last minute swap, and I don't think that instills confidence in that party. The same thing, Canadian. We take a look at Canadian politics. Elections not on the same timeline, but you don't want to push something like this if there's going to be a new leader. And I can't imagine how there's not. But I mean, I guess some folks just are intent on like driving the car off the cliff themselves. Then you would imagine sooner rather than later is the better play. And if the Prime Minister is starting to lose interest, and I don't want to sort of read too much into like skipping the Calgary Stampede, but if there is that sort of an inkling, or if that is sort of the mindset that maybe he's losing a bit of his gumption or losing maybe a bit of his willingness or his desire to step into those arenas, then maybe that's saying something. If it's not saying something to him, it's saying something to the general public.
Yeah, I mean, from a purely human perspective, I don't know why he would want to stick around and do this. He must be exhausted. He has endured the longest 8 years in federal politics ever. He has endured hate. He has endured abuse. It really has been unpleasant, I think, for him personally in a lot of respects. And as soon as he steps aside, he has this wonderful life ahead of him, doing public speaking, going to work for the UN, being involved in any number of causes that he cares about. The difference in the quality of life that he would have would be kind of striking. And so the only explanation I can think is he just really wants to kick Pierre Poilievre's ass. And on some level, I respect that, but you kind of have to be willing to read the room around you. And if you're going to take a beating and someone else can do better, what's the point? Then it becomes selfish. And I have been mooting Mark Carney's candidacy. I understand the weaknesses in it. I think the thing that sort of makes me interested in him as a potential leader, notwithstanding the fact that he's never been involved in politics before, is that he he will make Poilievre seem small by comparison. He will make Poilievre seem petty. He will make him seem simple. He will bring out his worst traits, his bullying of experts, his insecurities around, his achievements in terms of his, economic knowledge. He will, Carney will be able to present an economic case that is so vastly superior to what Poilievre has. It'll make his slogan seem almost pathetic, I think, in some respects. So there is, I think, a case in which Carney could rescue the party from where it is. And that, people always they either point to Michael Ignatieff or they point to Kim Campbell. I don't think he's an Ignatieff. Ignatieff, had a far more tenuous connection to the country, and Carney shows political skills, even if he hasn't been involved in politics. And Kim Campbell, people look at the end result, but people forget that once she took over, the Conservatives spiked in the polls. Before the 93 election, there was the thought that the Conservatives could win because Kim Campbell had resuscitated their fortunes so much. And it was only because of a disastrous campaign that kind of shifted back to the Chrétien Liberals. So, if you're going to go down to defeat, why not give someone a punching chance?
Yeah, someone here, Sylvia says, Mark Carney is nearing retirement age. I'm not sure why his name comes up all the time. Why would he want to enter politics? Carney turned 59 in March. I don't know if that's retirement age anymore. 59. I hope he's got a lot of fight left in him. The question is...
He's a spring chicken.
Yeah, I agree. The question is, does he even want it, right? I appreciate this comment as well, though, from David in the chat, who says Carney would refocus the message on the economy and could be a better match against Poilievre. I do think that that's an insightful comment from David. I mean, you've got a guy, governor of the Bank of Canada, has done a lot of work in the UK, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Reputation, CV speaks for itself. You go from, and I'm not trying to take, a cheap shot, low blow at the prime minister, but you go from the budget will balance itself to the former governor of the Bank of Canada, and that does instill some credibility on the number one issue that Pierre Poilievre is going to attack the Liberals on, which is money management, affordability, people's life. Is it better or worse than when Justin Trudeau was elected prime minister in 2015? I mean, that's the number one question that he's already asking people.
Exactly, and I can already sort of see the ads. Let's say Donald Trump does get elected, and Mark Carney is the Liberal leader, they can say, look, this was the guy that got Canada through the great financial crisis as the governor of the Bank of Canada. This guy knows how to steer the ship through rocky waters. Do you really trust Poilievre to be the captain at a time like this? Carney brings a kind of instant credibility, as you say, on the issue that the current iteration of the Liberal Party has been weak on since day one. And it really kind of, I think, neutralizes a lot of Poilievre's attack lines on the current Liberal Party, and maybe as leader he can kitchen sink some of the policies that are unpopular, some of the faces, personalities, what have you, and then at least people can buy into the idea that, well, it's not total change, it's not the change that Poilievre is proposing, but maybe I don't want that much change. Maybe I just want a little bit of change, and this sort of more sober, more serious, more adult version of the Liberal Party is what I want. I do think that there is a case there.
We're talking to Max Fawcett. If you're just tuning in on the Mixler live streaming audio app presented by California Closets, when we come back, I saw on Twitter that you noticed our episode a couple of days ago, our Naheed Nenshi fact-checked episode with Cynthia Moore, former president of the United Conservative Party, and Peter McCaffrey of the Alberta Institute. And I wanted to talk to you. I think most folks know you're the former editor of Alberta Oil magazine. You've obviously had Alberta's Power Grid on your radar for a long time. You know what you're talking about. You have a good handle on that type of stuff. And there were a couple of things that Peter talked about, economic withholding. He talked about, in particular, some of the delivery and the access fees on people's bills. And speaking of affordability, I mean, this was reiterated to a lot of people, utility costs in this past year. I wanted to put a couple of his comments in front of you and get your take on it. That with Max Fawcett in just a moment. In the meantime, this episode is happening with the support of California Closets, and we talk a lot, when I'm talking about California Closets, and I'm talking as a satisfied customer, by the way, longtime satisfied customer, about how they can custom design your closets, your installations, your storage solutions to your budget. But what does that actually mean? Well, if you go to californiaclosets.ca, you can dig into it and get a better sense of what custom designed to your budget actually means. Starting with level 1. So there's 4 levels here. They have practical simplicity, okay, a custom system to maximize your storage, perfect for like small pantries, hallways, kids' spaces. Level 2 has expanded features, better for, your closet, your laundry room, your mudroom, maybe your wine bar. Level 3, your elevated details. This could be a beautiful elevated closet, a home office, a garage with special touches that make it unique. And then where California Closets really shines is level 4. That's luxury refined, elegant systems with luxe aesthetics and customizable features. This, we're talking about media centers, large walk-in closets, and the like. You can learn all about it, and you risk nothing with a free consultation booked at californiaclosets.ca. Our friends at Complete Care Restoration want to remind you that if disaster strikes in your neck of the woods, it could be a community event, a wildfire. It could be something like a flooding event that's impacting all your neighbors, you, yourself, the people you care about. Or maybe it's just a one-off. Maybe it's a renovation that all of a sudden a wall's opened up and you find black mold there. Regardless of the scale of the project, Complete Care Restoration has the team ready to respond 24/7. You can contact them anytime by way of their website. That's completecarerestoration.ca. You can also get in touch with them, of course, by calling 780-454-0776. The team at Kubi Renewable Energy has a bunch of satisfied customers this time of year. No doubt about that. Folks that have gone green with solar installations by Kubi. This time of year, the sunlight we are seeing, folks are not only powering their properties, but they're selling back to the grid. They've got more and more testimonials on their website you can read. You can also see examples of their work. These are the cleanest installations in the business. Kubi Renewable Energy, a full-service contractor for residential and commercial solar power systems, online at kubienergy.ca. And if you're going to be barbecuing with friends or family this weekend, you're going to want to make sure you visit your local Freesin Brothers. They've got giveaways, grilling tips, and more. You can find details on their website. That's freson.com, or hit them up at one of their 17 locations. They're proud to feature Alberta's finest meats, the finest cuts of Alberta beef, pork, chicken, bison, you name it, plus artisan breads and pastries, and of course, locally sourced produce. That's just part of what sets Freesin Brothers apart. Alberta grown and Alberta owned. So as we do on Real Talk, we'll talk to the political leaders. We prefer those interviews to be one-on-one. That's what sets them apart. And then after those interviews, we chew the fat. We dig through it. We talk to folks that agree with what they've heard. We talk to folks that disagree. We did it in February with the Prime Minister. We've done it with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. And most recently, after we sat down with the new Alberta NDP leader, Naheed Nenshi, we invited in a couple of his political opponents, his biggest critics, to fact-check what he had to say about the party that they support, the United Conservative Party led by Danielle Smith. If you missed that episode, you can check it out. It's our July 9th episode with Cynthia Moore and Peter McCaffrey. Peter, in particular, started to pin some of the prices on electricity, the rising utility costs, on Naheed Nenshi, who, of course, was not premier, but was a 3-term mayor of Calgary up until recently. Before we get Max to comment on it, here's some background.
Alberta's always had traditionally very, very low electricity prices because we have a competitive market in electricity, and that helps keep prices down. And then there was about a 5 to 6 month period where electricity prices spiked. And they spiked essentially because we had a shortage of electricity. And when you have a shortage of something, prices go up, at least temporarily, until that gets resolved. But the reason we had a shortage of electricity was because his new party, when they were in government, phased out coal years and years earlier than everybody was ready to do so. And they phased out coal before natural gas was ready to take over. And so we had a shortage, and so prices spiked. So you've had both Nenshi and other guests come on your show and talk about this, and they try and talk about how, actually it's because of something called economic withholding, and it's not actually because of the coal phase out and all this kind of stuff. And I don't want to get too far into the technicalities of it, but economic withholding is basically just when electricity companies up the price because there's a shortage. And so when they make that argument, they're saying, prices didn't go up because there's a shortage of electricity. They went up because prices went up. And it's kind of a silly argument.
So it's economic withholding. It's taken Alberta from coal-fired power to otherwise natural gas. What is it, Max, in your estimation, in your opinion?
Well, Peter's right about one thing. That was a silly argument. Let's be clear. The NDP's coal phase-out was for 2030. We're in the year 2024, and there is no coal left on the grid. That is not the doing of the NDP. That is because the private sector, and specifically the large utility companies in Alberta, decided it was in their best interests to phase their coal plants offline and replace them with natural gas much sooner. They did that not because of Notley or Trudeau. They did that because natural gas was cheap, because the industrial carbon price that was in place made natural gas less expensive than coal. And they did it because as utilities that are suddenly much lower carbon, they're more able to attract capital and attract investment. You look at TransAlta's share price, ever since it ditched coal, it's done, I think, pretty darn well. So the idea that this is somehow, the NDP's doing and therefore by proxy Nenshi's doing just doesn't make sense. And look, don't listen to me. I'm just a journalist. Let's listen to Blake Schaefer, who is, as you know, probably the province's foremost expert on electricity. He's a professor at the University of Calgary. He's a former energy trader. He and a bunch of colleagues did a study a couple years ago, basically trying to figure out what exactly drove the spike in Alberta's electricity prices. And they disentangled all the various components. And what they found out was that the change in supply, so that the decline in coal, the increase in natural gas, the rise of renewables, that added 5% to the overall increase. 60% of the spike in electricity prices was because of changing behavior on the part of bidders, the companies that generate the electricity. In other words, economic withholding. So no, economic withholding is not because the NDP phased out coal. It's because the power purchase agreements that were in place expired under the UCP in 2021. And suddenly this small number of companies that control Alberta's electricity generation, you have ATCO, you have TransAlta, you have Capital Power. ATCO sold its assets to Heartland Generation, but it's a very small number of companies. They can bid, basically, the way the market works is they say, this is what the price that we'll sell our electricity for. And if they all move their bids higher, then the price of electricity goes up, right? And that is what economic withholding is that these companies are bidding in at higher prices because they know they have market control, they have a concentration where they can kind of use their weight. So no, there's no way that you can blame this on the NDP. I know that the Premier has tried to do this. I see Peter trying to do it. And they get away with it in large part because I think there's like 12 people in the province, and I do not include myself in this, who fully understand how Alberta's electricity market works. But, if you're going to fact check something that Nenshi said, you can't introduce facts that are then thereby checkable. You can't introduce spin if you're doing a fact check. Just my 2 cents on fact checking.
Yeah, I guess. I guess we can also debate what fact check means. People are lighting their hair on fire. James is lighting his hair on fire in the chat right now, taking issue with the guests that we've chosen. I'm not going to get into the weeds on producing talk shows and how maybe some people just need to chill the fuck out every once in a while and just listen to different opinions. You bring in a former UCP president to criticize Nenshi. Yeah, and it's worked for Vince McMahon and Dana White and Don King and a bunch of other people through history to bring in harsh critics and criticize politicians. Nobody gives a flying fuck if we bring in outspoken NDPers to take big swipes at Danielle Smith. We haven't got one single complaint to that, but we've got people that are so intent on protecting precious Nenshi right now that they're afraid of talk shows doing what talk shows do. And you can probably tell, Max, it's driving me a little bit crazy right now that in the middle of July, when everybody else is water skiing and we're still putting out episodes that people don't want to hear opinions different than their own. It's fine. It's fine if you disagree. It's totally fine. But here's the deal. When a political party leader comes on, like Naheed Nenshi, and takes big runs at the UCP, as we expect him to do, that's his job. He's going to be doing that for until the next election, and then he's just going to be getting started. I mean, just wait until the campaign trail. Just wait until things get going, right? So, does it not make sense to bring back people on behalf of I don't know, the 3.5 million conservatives in Alberta. I'm exaggerating, obviously, to represent that perspective. It's kind of what we do. But the conversation continues, and here you are, and I guarantee somebody's going to take issue with something you say, Max, and then we'll read their email, and that's kind of how it goes. That's kind of how conversation works, and I'm passionate about this, and I'm being facetious and silly and ridiculous because it is the middle of July, and we're able to have fun with this stuff right now. But if we lose our ability to go back and forth, if we lose our ability to remain as civil as possible and disagree and point out where we think that somebody's stretching the truth or where we think that somebody is flat out lying, then what's the point of even being here? What's the point of an exercise like this? You know what I'm saying? You don't know what people are going to say before they say it. You don't know how talk show episodes are going to play out. And I think it's important that we continue to keep our foot on the gas there. I really do think it's important. There's really not a lot of talk shows. There's not a lot of media outlets across the country or anywhere in the world that are reaching out across aisles, that are trying to hear both perspectives, right? There's been this sort of demonization of the both sides thing, right? I saw somebody tweet the other day that Jespersen, if he was doing Real Talk in the 40s, would have brought Hitler on just to hear the other side. I mean, it's almost like if you say I'm going to talk to an NDP supporter and I'm going to talk to a Conservative supporter in the same week on a talk show in Canada, that's a bad thing. And that really twists my gut. I'm really disappointed in that, and I hope that this is some sort of a short-term phenomenon. I don't know that it is, as a matter of fact. I think that we're skyrocketing toward further polarization. But you know what, man? That really concerns me.
Yeah, I share your concern there. I think having spaces where people from different sides of any conversation can meet and talk is crucial. I think, to your point, you always give people a chance to respond, right? That is, I think, the key is if, viewers, if followers think, hey, one side isn't being accurately or fairly represented, you always give the other side a chance to talk. And I think sometimes people lose sight of the fact that you're engaged in entertainment, right? This is supposed to be entertaining. This is supposed to be something that people obviously want to get informed by, obviously want to make sure that, the truth is spoken, but it also has to be fun. It also has to be a little bit spicy. That is the whole point. That has always been the point of radio, of a lot of forms of journalism. And, it is not this sort of ascetic pursuit of a universal truth, because I think about 10 people would show up and watch that. So,
well, to state the obvious, like, you don't know what talk show guests are going to say until they say it, right? Mm-hmm. We've had a few examples recently over the past year. As a matter of fact, we're working on it. Maybe we can tell people we've sort of got this episode locked and loaded. Max, we're working on our top 10 list called "They Said What," and we're going to do an episode of the top 10 most outrageous statements ever made on Real Talk. But we've had a few examples this year alone. But you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. And a lot of times, like if we weren't live streaming this show, some of that stuff might never make it out into the public. But I think that it's better that it did. I want to refocus on this as well, because there was kind of a part two to Peter's conversation about how electricity bills happen, how they become so expensive, and where the real costs lie. And here's where he got into it.
Some of your listeners now might be saying, well, okay, if electricity prices have gone down, which they have, they're pretty much back to normal. If electricity prices have gone down, why am I not seeing that on my bills? And I think if you dig into your bill, you'll see, and a lot of people have started noticing this, that actually one of the challenges is actually the fees. Not the actual electricity prices. But guess what? Nenshi had a role to play in that as well. In Calgary, you have something called the local access fee. And in Calgary, the local access fee was 5 to 6 times higher than it was in every other city across Alberta. And that was a deliberate choice that was made by Nenshi's council to keep that local access fee higher. It was pointed out to them many, many times. They kept that fee high, and they raked in an extra $130 million over the time that Nenshi was mayor from Calgary utility payers on their electricity. They could have got rid of that fee whenever they wanted, but they didn't. They wanted to keep that money. They wanted to be able to spend it on bike lanes and public art and things like that. And the current government has actually come in and said to the Calgary Council, now, no, you can't do that anymore. You have to use the same formula. You have to use the same method that every other city was using as well. So, again, Nenshi's trying to blame something on somebody else, but actually when you dig into it, he was the one responsible for many of those fees.
Max?
No, not even close. one of the things that I was looking forward to with Justin Trudeau eventually leaving, it was that Alberta Conservatives would stop blaming everything on him. I can see now they're just going to replace Trudeau with Nenshi, and they're going to blame him for everything that's gone wrong. So let's get into the history of local access fees. They've been around since 1956. I'm pretty sure that Nenshi was not the mayor of Calgary in 1956. We have these franchise fees, these local access fees in Edmonton with EPCOR. You have them in Calgary with NMAX. This is not unusual. Nobody is calling on EPCOR to get rid of its fees. Nobody is calling on NMAX to get rid of its fee because those are businesses. They need to get paid for their work. The problem is that in Calgary, they hinge it on the regulated rate option, the provincial sort of regulated rate, and that went haywire over the last couple of years, which is why Calgary was raking in far more than they did in Edmonton. I think it was $75 on an average bill annually in Edmonton, and it was $250 in Calgary. But in previous years, when the market has been different, and this is also under Nenshi, Calgarians have paid less for their local access fee than Edmontonians have, because Edmontonians sort of pay a fixed rate that doesn't fluctuate. So no, this has nothing to do with Nenshi. He did not bring this in. He did not choose to make it more expensive. This is just a aggressively uninformed gerrymandering of the facts. And it's disappointing because, there is a legitimate argument here around changing the way that the franchise fee in Calgary works. Blake Schaefer, who I mentioned before, was at the forefront of that. I think it's important that people have predictability in their electricity bills. And I think it's important that the city of Calgary not benefit indirectly when prices go really high. And so I think we're in the process of fixing that. But the idea that this is like some cash grab to fund bike lanes and public art, which, by the way, are fine. There's nothing wrong with those. But the idea that it's a cash grab is just, uninformed nonsense. And if you really want to get into why people pay so much on their bills for fees, it's the progressive conservatives. It's the progressive conservatives when they deregulated the electricity market and then built out all this transmission infrastructure, which was, if you ask Danielle Smith, that was her sort of one of her earlier fights in politics when she was the leader of the Wild Rose. But that is why our bills have these giant fixed charge components on them. It's not Nenshi, who was the mayor of Calgary and had no input over any of that stuff. So can we please be serious here and just blame Nenshi for the things he's actually responsible for?
Kimberly in the chat says, FYI, public art is funded through development, and having bike lanes and public art is awesome, by the way. Number one, I think, off the top of my head, I think Kimberly's right. I remember hearing, and I may be wrong, I hope, but I think municipal development, it would be municipality by municipality, right? The rules on public art. I think Edmonton's at a 1% requirement. If I remember correctly, 1% of the cost of your development has to be represented with in some form of art installation. There's somebody who could explain that better than me, probably from the Edmonton Arts Council, but I think that's a good, I think that's a sort of a good parameter to have. And yeah, like I don't know, the bike lane thing to me, I want to hear all people out. I understand that some businesses are frustrated. They feel like they've lost their parking, this, that, and the other. But also I see people using bike lanes, and I do kind of feel like we need to get over it and like grow up in our vision of what our cities are going to look like. I recognize people want to see them built efficiently. They want to be built in the right places, that sort of a thing. But like bike lane period is not inherently bad. And I don't think it should be inherently bad for anybody. People in your community use them. We ride with our kids in the bike lanes. It helps me feel more safe. You can't really put a price on that. So anyway, let's move on. I've never done something like this before, and I've been scouring this as you've been talking to ensure that I'm not putting any personal information up on the screen here. But Max, I have called up my power bill, okay? and I'm going to be honest with you about something. Like most people, I'm a little bit guilty of like not digging into the details, right? Johnny and I were remember we were talking about our cable and internet bills the other day.
This bill is very low.
Looks pretty
to
good, right?
Yeah, very low.
Looks pretty good. So this is actually, so for people listening on the podcast, we'll help you out here. But this is my family's bill for, it looks like the month of June. This is the most recent one that I have. So Max, take us through this. We're charged $88-ish for energy, an additional $71 for regulated transmission and distribution, $1.50 for balancing pool allocation. My municipal fee to the city of Edmonton is about $11, and my retailer fees are about $8.25, for a total of pre-GST total of about $179. We'll call it $180 with about $9 of GST on there for just under $190. Take us through my power bill and help us understand what's going on here.
Yeah, well, first of all, kudos to your family for keeping the AC down.
We're trying.
Those energy. Although I guess it was May, June, so
it
I
was
feel like
raining.
That's the low. The low. Yeah, it was raining. But so that's that's the actual energy you use, the actual electricity that you're pulling in to use your computer or run your AC or what have you. The regulated transmission and distribution is the charge they stick on the bill to basically pay off all of the power lines and other infrastructure that the province has built, and obviously needs to get paid off over the course of time. But the criticism back in the the Redford and Stelmach days was they overbuilt that massively. They trampled over land rights of private landowners, and they just built too much transmission and distribution infrastructure, and so we as a result pay these very, very high rates compared to other provinces. The balancing pool is paying off the remainder of, you remember the story under the NDP where they basically a couple of power producers handed their assets back over to the balancing pool because prices were too low back then and they weren't making any money. So that's just sort of amortizing that remaining debt. And then the municipal fee is the franchise fee. So that's basically what you're paying EPCOR to get the electricity from the transmission lines into your house and run their business. And then the retailer fees, I guess. Retailer fees are. Do you use a non-EPCOR retailer or maybe that's?
Yeah, I mean they're not paying us anymore to say this, but we'll still give a shout out to Park Power. Park Power was an awesome Real Talk partner and sponsor, and we still have a ton of respect for them and actually recommend that people still use them, even though they don't still use us, but that's all right. So, but Max, like people are asking, well, Ryan, what's your rate on that power? What are your kilowatt hours? And like, I don't even know, to be honest with you. And I don't know, maybe Johnny, if you take it off the screen, I'll scroll back. And so I can
also
get back
like you're on the regulated, right? You're fixed.
Yeah, I think so.
So mine is floating and it's been hell. It finally came a bit back down, but
here we go. Okay, so I'm just don't show it yet, Johnny. I don't want to show my address on here, obviously, but let me just Max get to this. Oh, here. Oh, geez, this is like an old man trying to set the clock on his VCR. This is brutal, but
this is part of the problem is that these electricity bills are so complicated to understand. And you kind of need like you almost need to take a course to understand what it means, what your options are, and it opens the door, I think, to a lot of political mischief on the part of people who want to make you angry about it and make you blame someone for it, right? And make you say, it's this current politician's fault, and it's really just the result of choices we made. There is an argument to be made about the market structure that we have in Alberta. Ironically, it's one of the reasons why we have so much renewable energy. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why Alberta was the most attractive jurisdiction in Canada for wind and solar before the UCP came and stepped all over it. But it also has its downsides, and this is one of them. I know my friends in BC, for example, they pay a lot less in electricity than we do. And that part of that is because it's a crown corporation. It's owned by the government. It's owned by citizens.
Okay, so I have the answer here. Energy charges. This is from May 8th to May 31st, using 746 kilowatt hours at just over 9 cents. And then June 1st to 6th, 207 kilowatt hours at that same price. So yeah, the fixed 9.25. Yeah. So there you have it. The answer for anybody that was curious.
And the other bummer about this is that even if you put solar on your roof, you're not getting away from those distribution charges, right? So even if your energy charge goes to zero, you're pulling $0, zero electrons from the grid, you still got to pay that $71, right? Because you still have to help amortize decisions that were made 10, 15 years ago.
How do you feel? How do you feel about that? That's kind of like, I'm going to step in one here making this comparison, but people that send their kids to private schools still pay property taxes that fund public education. Should people that put solar panels on their roof, someone's going to light their hair on fire now that I'm comparing solar panels to private schools, but should somebody that puts solar panels on their roof still pay to fund the public grid? Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open. It's a reasonable thought experiment, I think. You are a citizen. You are, contributing to, or you're, benefiting from the sort of broader asset that is out there that's funding or that's powering businesses and what have you. What I would like to see is the ability for people to put electricity back on the grid and get paid for it, right? If you're going to charge people for the infrastructure and help, for amortizing old infrastructure, if I generate extra solar, let me sell it back.
Yeah, but people are
to some extent. But doing like dynamic metering where you do time of day use and you can send electricity back at certain times and take it at certain times. Like make us all more active participants in the electricity grid. And as a byproduct, I think a lot of people will actually learn more and know more about it.
I saw you interacting with Chris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation earlier this week. She was reporting an energy scarcity warning in Alberta. People were told to avoid using hair dryers, cooking supper at certain times a day. And you sort of seem to take issue with her position on this. This was a story that obviously, when was that? February when Alberta January, when, obviously the premier was, where everyone's getting the notices on their phones and Danielle Smith's asking everybody to sort of chill out on their usage and then everybody started. On this show, I mused about how it seemed to me to be a useful political strategy at the time, a useful political tool at the time to, in my mind, create some doubt and uncertainty around renewables. And it just seemed to be convenient that the renewables ban was in place as the government, was reiterating the fact that Albertans might not have enough power and everybody's so thankful. And I guess I shouldn't be joking around because we are thankful for energy security and grateful for the people that work in that field. That's no joke. But it just sort of stunk to me in a way, like it just sort of raised my hackles a little bit. You don't expect to see it, though, in the middle of the summer, right? I mean, I guess aside from huge power draws, obviously, but that's when the energy supply is supposed to be most reliant. So what's going on? What's happening this week?
Yeah, two things come to mind here. The first one is, absolutely, we have, I think, record or near record power demand right now, which is a reflection, I think, of the changing climate. It used to be that we didn't have a lot of AC demand in Alberta. It is going up every year because, of course, it gets hotter every year. And so the shape of our power demand is shifting. It used to be that we would see our biggest demand in the winter. Now we're going to see our biggest demand in hot summer days like we just saw. Solar was working balls out, did a great job for most of the day. But, of course, the sun sets, as people like to remind me when I talk about solar, and people were still running their AC units in the evenings. And I don't think that the ASO fully prepared for that because, like I said, there was 3 gigawatts of natural gas capacity that was offline. They should have seen the weather forecast. They should have known that this was going to happen. And they should have said to those gas plants, hey, you guys got to fire up. You got to be ready for this. And they do have that power. So, again, it's not this indictment of renewables, which is what conservatives like Chris Sims seem to do whenever there's a grid issue. They blame renewables. It's actually an indictment of the legacy issues and the people running the system, because there was ample supply available if they had the ability to call on it. As to the near outage in January, and that one I think was a lot more dire because we were pretty tight. We were pretty close to things tripping, rolling blackouts. But let's just say if you were feeling particularly conspiratorial, you might wonder if someone told one of those natural gas plants to gently roll offline at that time to make a point about renewables, because that is effectively, that was what happened back then. You had these 2 gas facilities that for some reason were offline at a time when everyone knew they needed as much electricity as possible. Why was that? Well, it would be good if we had an investigation into that, if we got to the bottom of why gas plants were rolling offline. But I suspect we won't get it under this government because they clearly have a vested interest in making renewables seem as unreliable and untrustworthy as possible. I don't know why they want to do that, given the economic opportunity associated with building wind and solar in Alberta. But there we are.
Yeah, it just seems like bad business. I don't have my natural gas stuff in front of me because I want to check something here. But Cam in a pizzeria in our live chat says, I know you guys are talking power. Maybe Cam can email us his bill. Says, I know you're talking power, but the fact that we're paying more in carbon tax than actual gas used on a monthly basis is the most frustrating thing about utilities. I do know Cam's an entrepreneur. You'd never guess it, but he owns a pizza joint. Make sure you go visit him in Leduc. But I noticed that you were chatting or hoping to chat carbon tax with your MP. the other day on Twitter. For people who follow you, they'll see you calling out your member of parliament on this and on the claim. I think, what was it, that they were claiming that Canadians pay a certain amount per year. The average family, something like $2,400 a year or something like that. $2,900 on carbon taxes. Now, some families probably do, but maybe not the average family. Is that what you're saying?
So what it turned, I asked for clarification, knowing I wouldn't get it from him because he doesn't talk to me. But one of my eagle-eyed followers sent me an email, and he showed me where the figure came from. It was one that Pierre Poilievre used in the House of Commons recently, and it's from buried deep in the supplementary tables of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. What that number is the economic cost of the carbon tax combined with the fiscal cost. So basically, the carbon taxes you pay plus the modeled economic costs. It does not include the rebate. So why are you telling people in your communication to constituents that Canada's carbon tax will cost Alberta families an additional $2,943 in 2024 when you're not including the rebate, which everyone knows exists or should know exists? And when you include the rebate, that number goes down to $900. So it's really disappointing to see them continue to just flagrantly misrepresent what's happening with this policy. I know this is a losing battle. I know it's a lost battle. Nuance doesn't play in 2024 on social media, but it would be nice if we could have a fact-based conversation about climate policy, because at some point we're going to have to do that, I think.
But before we go, want to let people know that you've sort of decided, and good on you for doing this. You're stepping away from your column until what, fall, September? Is that when you're going to come back?
Yeah, September.
Which is great. Recharge your batteries through the summer, spend more time with your family, and obviously, I'm sure, pursue other ventures as well. Are you quietly working on a book, by the way?
I feel like if I say it, I'll jinx it, but yes, I am working on a longer project. And also, I just need to retrain my brain to think in things other than columns and tweets.
Yeah.
I don't read enough books anymore. I don't spend enough time just quietly looking out at the trees anymore. And so, I get a summer where I get to recharge. I get to read books again. I get to think about bigger picture issues, and then come back to it in September. And I've got, an American election to cover. I've got federal election coming up, God knows when. And of course, Alberta serves up a wonderful smorgasbord of craziness on a daily basis.
Oh, the fall session at the Alberta legislature is going to be unbelievable. Do you forecast? I mean, do you think when we talked to Nenshi, it was June 24th, for people that want to check out that episode, we asked him about, where he'll seek a seat. And I was wondering, is Joe Ceci going to step down in Calgary? Is, something going to happen there? Is he going to run in Lethbridge where Shannon Phillips is leaving? Do you have a thought on that? He said to us that it's not his top priority, which I do believe through the summer. But I don't believe that in the fall, and I don't believe that he can be effective outside, or as effective outside of the legislature. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's easy to say that it's not a priority when it's not in session. I think once, the idea of him not being the one to ask the first question of the premier in question period would not sit well with him at all. And so I think he will seek a seat at his earliest possible convenience. I suspect that the UCP would slow play that as much as possible to frustrate him. But no, I don't think he's going to run in Lethbridge. I think the risks are just much too high there. He's not from Lethbridge. There's no connection to the community. And then if he wins, he's constantly having to go from Edmonton to Lethbridge. And I think, Shannon Phillips can attest to the fact that is a tough commute. So I think he will find something in Calgary, whether it's Joe Ceci stepping aside or one of the other NDP MLAs. I think he will find a seat in Calgary as soon as possible, but I suspect the UCP will make soon as possible as long as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I did want to touch on it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that this was your final column before the summer about Alberta's War Room. And I know that the story feels a bit dated now because it was about 3 weeks ago, but as you write at nationalobserver.com, Max is the lead columnist at Canada's National Observer. Alberta's War Room waves the white flag. Of course, this was the Canadian Energy Centre that was established by Jason Kenney to tell Alberta's stories and to debunk mistruths about Alberta's energy sector, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It had a couple of self-owns early on, stealing logos from others, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody knew there were some kind of embarrassing moments, but then it continued to operate out of the limelight for the most part, out of the spotlight, let me say. Were you surprised to see this iteration of the Conservative government, the provincial government, pull the plug on this? Your thoughts on it?
Not entirely, in part because I think they've realized that they have more effective proxies in other places for this argument. They have, the Canada Proud, and they have the I Heart Oil Sands Group, and they have a bunch of proxies who are doing the same thing that the War Room was doing, just doing it better, more aggressively, and probably more effectively on social. And I think they also brought the War Room, they brought it under the government's umbrella because they were worried about Bill C-59, the federal government's omnibus legislation that also takes a hard look at greenwashing by companies. We saw Pathways basically pull all the content off of its website in response to this bill, and I think there was some nervousness that perhaps they could get the War Room could get in trouble for stretching or bending the truth. Which, I mean, doesn't that really say it all? That if they're afraid of getting their knuckles wrapped for stretching the truth, what are they doing in the first place? Isn't that their purpose, maybe, to stretch and bend the truth? So, I, from the day this idea was cooked up by Jason Kenney, I called it out for being, just a dreadful bit of navel gazing. It betrayed the fact that they didn't know what the real issues were with the energy sector. They didn't know what the real challenges were. Its behavior was worse than I could have ever expected, and now it gets rolled up in this sort of ignominious little retreat. But the problem, as I've said many times in many columns, it's not about telling a better story. It's about changing the story. The energy sector has to change its story, and that means taking action. It means actually doing things to adjust people's perception rather than just trying to spin and message them. And the fact that they haven't figured that out in more than 5 years now does not exactly fill me with confidence.
Travis in the live chat says, a sponsor's getting mentioned. I know that Travis isn't new here. Travis knows that we're not going to sweat when somebody mentions Pathways Alliance in so many ways as we're not going to sweat when we're telling you about the work that Pathways Alliance is doing. I mean, we had Naheed Nenshi on the other day celebrating the work that Pathways Alliance is doing. We had Federal Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault on the show, a Liberal, talking about what Pathways Alliance is doing. So we're not afraid to talk about it. And just because you sponsor Real Talk doesn't mean that you're not going to be discussed if your name pops up in the news cycle. So let's talk about that Pathways Alliance thing and the C-59 thing. We got one angle on it from Jason Leslie the other day. He joined us on July 8th. That was on our Monday episode. He had his eye on Alberta business presented by the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. There's a lot of businesses that are taking issue with C-59. You as a journalist, Max, this is essentially around, correct my phrasing, but it's like environmental reporting, right? I mean, this is kind of what it comes down to. What are the corporate implications and what jumps out at you with it?
So in essence, what it does is it shifts the burden of proof from, a complainant has to say, hey, this company is engaged in false advertising, to the company has to basically ensure that it isn't engaged in false advertising. So it sort of shifts the burden and makes it more onerous. I don't have a problem with that in principle, because I think that, there is a lot of talk from the oil and gas industry about what they're going to do in 2050. There's very little talk about what they're doing in 2024. And I do think that is an attempt by them to kind of rag the puck and slow roll the public. That is the new kind of strategy that they're using. They're not going to deny climate change. They're not going to attack carbon pricing. They're just going to say, hey, we're going to do all this great stuff. Just don't rush us. And I think the federal government is within its purview to push back against that. Now, having said that, I reached out to Guilbeault's office when this came out and said, hey, you guys are talking about, the advertising they do has to accord to internationally applicable standards. Please tell me you have those standards handy, that you already know what they are. And it sounds to me they don't. Like they are now working, they're now consulting, they're now engaging to find out what those internationally recognized standards are and should be for the oil and gas sector. And that is a problem, because if you're going to hold people to a level of legal accountability, you probably need to have the level sort of benchmarked before you bring the legislation forward. And it kind of speaks to this government's fondness for grand gestures, fondness for, soaring rhetoric, and then losing the details. We saw this with the carbon tax rebate, where they couldn't even get the banks to label it consistently for years, and only recently kind of got that sorted out. So I do think this is another example of good intentions, bad execution by the Liberal government. And I do think businesses have a right to be a little irritated and frustrated. I also think when they pull all their content off their website, whether it's, an oil and gas company or what have you, that is a tell. That is a sign that they are not confident that they are telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Interesting. I was just about to cut you loose, but do you have to go, by the way?
No, I'm on a vacation, Ryan. I got all time.
I love
kinds
this.
of time.
Either do John and I. John, we have till like 3:30 today. We can just hang out here. And
I was just thinking when Matt mentioned, or Max mentioned that he was going to look at the trees more. I got this picture of Max like taking time off, maybe going to a cabin or a lake, and looking out the window with a green tea and just relaxing finally, and then a Dodge Ram jacked up with truck nuts and a "fuck Trudeau" sticker just drives by, and his eye just starting to twitch like he can't get away from it.
And the guy with truck nuts has rented the cabin right next door.
Yeah, you're in for a good week.
Yeah. This one from Dwayne, which is it's kind of an open-ended question, but it's interesting. Dwayne wonders what does Max think will happen with governments and water issues. I mean, that's obviously a huge question, and you could approach that from a bunch of different angles. But I love that Dwayne brought it up. The water main break, and we've done a couple of episodes this year, one on World Water Day off the top of my head, and another one more recently. Water Wars. That was the name of the episode. That's right, Johnny, and you killed it on the thumbnail, by the way, for that one. But we could talk about this from a million different angles. The water main break in Calgary reiterated our water infrastructure needs, obviously our reliance on water, and the assumption that we'll always have access to clean water unless you're living on a reserve. And I don't say that facetiously. That's something, obviously, that Canada still needs to figure out. Although, can we give the Trudeau Liberals credit there? That is one thing that they have made some progress on. But how do you take the question from Dwayne, governments and water issues?
I don't think it's going to be as catastrophic as I think I imagined it would be, like when I was in high school. I definitely imagined there was going to be like water wars and America was going to use pipelines to steal our water. And I think that, the low cost of renewable energy has kind of made that a non-issue. But in Alberta, it definitely is an issue because we don't have a lot of water resources here. And we have major demands on our water, whether it's agriculture, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's people, wanting to water their lawns and water their flowers. So I do think that the politics are going to get more contentious. I think industry is 5 miles ahead of us on this. They're already game planning how they protect their access to the water they need. I think we should all be probably doing the same. I think we should have a hierarchy of needs. And, I have to say, I think ag comes at the top of that list. And if we can't grow food, we can't do a lot of things. But everyone has to get more efficient. Everyone has to get smarter about it. I love what they're doing in Okotoks, where they have an incentive program where if you get a rain barrel or if you get rid of your grass on your front lawn, they give you a tax credit. I think, I personally, and this is something I inherited from my father, but I think having a lush green lawn is kind of obnoxious. And especially in, 2024, it's not a luxury that we really should be aiding and abetting. And as to the politics of it, I have to give credit to Peter, or at least agree with him on something that he said, which is that, politicians that don't get the basics right, municipal politicians that don't get the basics right are going to pay a high price. If you're out there talking about the climate crisis, but you can't give people water for their homes to fill their pool, their kiddie pools and whatnot, you are going to lose elections. And so I think municipal politicians across the province, across the country have to be really, really smart about, are we auditing this infrastructure often enough? Are we investing in it enough? Are we ensuring that we're prepared for these sorts of eventualities? Because when they happen, people really, really get their noses out of joint. And I think justifiably so. This takes me back to when I lived in Toronto under Rob Ford, but this is why Rob Ford won elections that progressives couldn't figure out why he won. It's because he promised to pick up people's garbage on time. That was what they wanted. They didn't want, soaring aspirational statements. They wanted the trains to run on time. They wanted their garbage to get picked up. They wanted all the basics done. So, my message to progressive municipal politicians, and it has been for a while, you got to take care of the basics first. Then you move up the chain to the aspirational stuff, because otherwise you're not going to be in office very long.
Yeah, I appreciate M8 putting this on our radar. We'll credit the Edmonton Journal with the reporting. That's Matthew Black there. Alberta's Auditor General, Doug Wiley here, he found that Alberta has no water conservation objectives in most basins and does not know if existing ones are working. This was a story that was filed just a number of hours ago, so people can check that out. That's obviously something a lot of people should be probably paying closer attention to, and something obviously that we'll continue to take a look at through these next number of weeks and months. Do you have your first book chosen, or have you already started one for your summer reading mission?
I have a pile. I have a stack, not behind me, but in another room. And there's a mixture of fiction and nonfiction.
Do you have a book recommendation for Real Talkers?
I mean, if everyone hasn't read John Valiant's book about the wildfire in Fort McMurray, I would strongly recommend it. It keeps winning awards. I think it will become more and more relevant, as the years roll on here. And he's an amazing writer, an amazing just human being. So I would strongly recommend that.
Yeah, Max, it's just beautiful what you've teed up for us back on June 20th of 2023. People can watch John Valiant on Real Talk. I'm showing the highlight right now, which is sometimes we'll put up highlights, like 30 seconds to 15 minutes type thing, depending on the length. And you can also, of course, access that full interview from June 20th of last year. That guy is an unbelievable storyteller. And really did an amazing job. We'll link to that episode with John Valiant in the show notes to this one. And you didn't even know, Max. I love that. What a happy accident. Man, we always love chewing the fat with you and hanging out. Kind of went into overtime here. We appreciate your availability. Have a wonderful summer. I look forward to the next time we can have a beer in person and welcome you back to the show.
Can't wait, buddy. It was a pleasure.
You got it. That's Max Fawcett, lead columnist at Canada's National Observer. I don't know. All I can think about right now is truck nuts. I don't know why that just really,
soon as he
really
said
resonated with me.
It just because Max is that type of guy. Like I bet even when he's on vacation, he's like, I'm not gonna look at my phone, and he has to every day. He cracks a coffee or whatever he does in the morning, whether he's at the lake or in another province or whatever. And guaranteed, he tries to get away from all the discourse and all the media.
Don't know if he can.
But I don't think he can.
That's why
he's
when
the
he
guy
said,
who he has to be in there.
When he announced that he was stepping away from his column for the summer, right away I'm like, he's writing a book.
Yeah.
There's no way that Max Fawcett is just doing bong rips and like getting stoned all summer and
that's a vacation
watching all the Star Wars
writing
movies
a novel.
or something. Right? Yeah. I always love when we see new or relatively new names in the chat. Shout out to a Green Tomato who just says, I sure appreciate Max's work. Which is great. I also wanted to touch on something. James and I have been having a little bit of fun back and forth. I called James to the carpet earlier, tell him to relax, and then James fires back like the true gentleman he is with a $5 super chat contribution.
Yeah, and Travis too. Thank you.
And Travis, so I want to let James know you have officially secured a beer in the Real Talk beer fridge with that, and Travis as well. So thanks to the two of you. We sure appreciate you. But then James is having a little fun with the protection around our Real Talk sponsors. Listen, this show does not happen without our sponsors, but we don't accept sponsorships from people that we have problems with. And James says to me, well, I've never heard Bitcoin criticized on Real Talk.
Yes, it has.
Number one, that's not true. That's definitely not true. Number two, which is the most important thing. I'm having fun. Here's the most important thing. Don't ever take financial advice from me. Ever. Never. Do not ever take financial advice from me. And even when we were sponsored by a Bitcoin company, what did I say? I did not say we are recommending you buy Bitcoin. I said, if you're thinking of buying Bitcoin or have questions about Bitcoin, talk to these people. But, and here's the but, if you had bought Bitcoin,
I was just going to say,
when we were talking about buying Bitcoin, your investment would be up about 175%.
If you've got one Bitcoin, you're lucky.
If you've got one Bitcoin, you're laughing right now. Now, I'm not a Bitcoin evangelist. Some of my friends are, but I do hold Bitcoin, and I'm interested by it, and I find it fascinating. And if you read the white paper on Bitcoin, you can just Google Bitcoin white paper, and you'll find it. You can read it in like 5 minutes. You may be compelled to learn a little bit more about it, and that's all I'm saying. Do not sell your investments to buy. Well, maybe some people think you should. I am not recommending you do it. Don't come to me if you lose all your money, because I am not a financial advisor. But James, we love, in all seriousness, those of you that have fun with us in the chat, those of you that are 100% serious about everything, and even those of you that are kind of back and forth on each other. We see that still, though, for the most part, keeping it on the rails. And you can't say that about every live chat. You can't say that about every internet forum. Again, this is my love letter to you, Real Talkers. There's something special about these live chats that happen here, and we appreciate you guys.
Yeah.
All right.
So don't buy Bitcoin, but you should have bought Bitcoin.
but maybe still buy Bitcoin.
No, because like seriously, we were talking about this the other day, and I was like, remember when we were so scared? But like, look at Bitcoin right now, and yeah, look how down it is.
Yeah.
But still, if you had bought one Bitcoin when it was at like $5,000 or $10,000,
yeah.
I mean, look at your investment now.
Yeah, exactly.
Freaking crazy.
Yeah, exactly. There's people that I was talking to a guy the other day that nobody likes to hear these stories because they're so annoying. But good for this guy. Someone in his company, he owns a company, has nothing to do with finance. Someone in his company who worked on the financial side of the company. I don't think it was the CFO, but somebody in the on the books. Came to him back in the day and was like, you should buy Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin was at $300.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, how many did you buy? Which is kind of a rude question. And he looked at me and he just said, lots.
And today it's at $79,000 per Bitcoin.
Some folks have their stories like that.
And I'm someone who made fun of Bitcoin all the time too. And now I look at him like, fuck. Because hey, I still think I don't like. It's like it's like the cloud, you know. Like it's kind of like it's not real, right? So I know there's any day that it could crash or whatever. But you're right. If you had invested at 300 and then today you just didn't look at it, and then today you're just cashed out.
Yeah.
That's wow.
So I'm talking to this guy. It's not, he didn't give me, permission to use his name or anything. And so I would just say that, so I said to this guy, so would you like it obviously changed his life. Mm-hmm. And I said, so what were like, as it went up, like he said, he bought it at 300 and it went to 5,000.
Yeah.
And this was a guy that like, he didn't know anything about it. He just, whatever. And so I said, what did you do? And he goes, well, at that point, he goes, I sold a bunch. He paid cash for a house and he paid cash for a Tesla. And I said, well, that's pretty exciting. And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, we call it my $5 million Tesla, because he sold at $5,000 to buy the car. Bitcoin's now where it is. And it was just one of those things. But hey, listen, man, life is full of woulda, coulda, shouldas, of people that like
still plus
bought
money.
high, bought low. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I bought Aurora cannabis stock, a ton of it at the highest level it ever reached, and now it's just an absolute disaster. So there's people, it's kind of funny. You get it in your head, you have no idea what you're doing. You get one of these like iTrade or personal trade accounts, and then you get a couple quick wins, and you start thinking that you're smarter than everybody else. Yeah. I didn't realize investing was so easy, and then all of a sudden, wham! It just hits a wall.
I have a good friend who's now into the day trading, right? And there's days where he hits me up. He's like, yeah, I just made like $5,000 in 4 minutes. And then there's days where he's like, I just lost 10 grand in like 2 minutes. So it's like, when you're flush, you're flush. When you're bust, you're bust. But Bitcoin was something like, I made serious fun of Bitcoin when it first came around, being like, this is a fucking scam. And then today, I have to say, like, I'm not saying it's solid and it's the most secure investment, but like you said, if you had invested a couple $100 today, you're laughing.
Yeah, exactly. People have questions about Bitcoin in the chat, wondering, well, how do I get my money?
We're not
out?
experts.
How do I sell it?
We're not experts.
But it is easy to buy and sell. You just go get an app or you talk to people, and we would mention the company name if they still sponsored us.
There is a pizza store on the corner here, a block from Mercer, that has a Bitcoin ATM. You can literally go, put your card in, change your money into Bitcoin.
Yeah, and there's companies, including restaurants, that'll accept Bitcoin as payment.
Yeah.
I mean, Kubi Energy will accept Bitcoin as payment, and in my mind, that's one of the most brilliant things that they do. So we'll see. Listen, we might 5 years from now not talk about Bitcoin ever again, or we'll look back and say, remember Bitcoin? Or 5 years from now, it might be all some people talk about. The fact of the matter is, if it's something that's intriguing us, or interesting you, then that's something that we want to get into. It's the whole premise of it. We're so grateful for you, Real Talkers. Thanks for showing up for us every single day. Coming up on our July 12th, that's going to be our Friday episode of Real Talk. Aretha Van Herk is going to join us out of Calgary. Camille Labchuk's going to join us. She's an animal rights lawyer and activist. We're going to go with two different takes on rodeo on a very special edition of the Real Talk Roundtable presented by our friends at Alberta Views Magazine. We'll talk to you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, Voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.